Church History in Plain Language, 5th edition, by Bruce L. Shelley. Chapter 22, Part B. Enter the Inquisitor. The scattered heretics had to be hounded out of hiding. That was the purpose of the Inquisition. The infamy of this institution has left its mark on the memories and vocabularies of people everywhere. We equate it with the ruthless miscarriage of justice. The early form of the Inquisition appeared in 1184 when Pope Lucius III required bishops to inquire into the beliefs of their subjects. They held an inquiry or inquest. Heresy or the harboring of a heretic brought immediate excommunication. The spread of the Waldenses and Albigenses, however, called for sinister measures. In 1215, the Fourth Lateran Council, under Innocent III's leadership, provided for the state's punishment of heretics, the confiscation of their property, excommunication for those unwilling to move against the heretics, and complete forgiveness of sins for those cooperating. In 1220, the Pope took the Inquisition from the hands of the bishops and turned it over to the newly formed Dominicans. And 9 years later, the Synod of Toulouse systemized inquisitorial policies, leaving an alleged heretic with virtually no rights. The inquisitor was subject to no law, only to the Pope. He was investigator, prosecutor, and judge. The trial was secret, and the accused had to prove his innocence, as in all courts following Roman law, without the benefit of counsel or knowledge of his accusers. The final significant step came in 1252. Pope Innocent IV authorized torture as a means of getting information and confessions from accused heretics. Popes, saints, and theologians had in the past rejected with horror the very thought, but no such reserve remained after Innocent III had ascended the papal throne, and the Catholic Church had achieved its majestic and powerful unity. Canon law, it is true, forbade a cleric from shedding blood. He who served the altars of the one sacrifice must not sacrifice a human being. He could only bound and interrogate and torture the prisoner. If he found the unfortunate person guilty of heresy, he turned him over to civil authorities, usually for burning at the stake. It was an ugly business, but almost everyone, after Augustine, agreed that saving the body by amputating a rotten limb was the path of wisdom. Clearly the Roman Church was the body and the heretic the rotten limb. The combination of the crusade against heresy in Talos and the Inquisition brought an end to Catharism before the 13th century closed. The doctrine that matter was incapable of salvation was, until the coming of Mary Baker Eddy, a thing of the past. The Waldensians, who were often targets of the same Inquisition, survived in the mountains of Italy and welcomed the Reformation when it broke over Europe in the 16th century. The Inquisition also survived, even with its serious weakness. It could amputate, but it could not heal. The ministry of healing arose in a village surrounded by vineyards 85 miles north of Rome. Assisi was the hometown of Giovanni Bernardone. We know him as St. Francis of Assisi. Francis, 1182 to 1226, was the son of a wealthy Italian cloth merchant. Francis's father had dreams of knighthood for his son. One minor military campaign, however, was enough for Francis. Perhaps while racked with fever in prison after being captured in battle, Francis meditated on the meaning of life, had a series of visions, and determined to turn his back on the world and his father's dreams. The reorientation was dramatic. Previously, he benefited from wealth, sought honor, and was repulsed by illness like leprosy. With Christ as his model, he abandoned the security of wealth, lived a humble life dedicated to benefiting others, and embraced lepers. Leaving home in a ragged cloak and a rope belt taken from a scarecrow, he wandered the countryside with a few followers, begging from the rich, giving to the poor, and preaching the joys of life amid poverty. Founding the Franciscans. In 1209, Francis prepared a simple rule for his little brotherhood. It consisted chiefly of Christ's appeal to take up the cross, his advice to the rich young ruler, and his directions on sending out the apostles. With this rule, Francis and his companions went to Pope Innocent III for approval. The scene was almost a reproduction of Waldo before Alexander III in 1179. But times had changed. Innocent saw the mistake others had made, so he approved the little preaching band. Francis called the group the Friars Minor, Lesser Brothers. We call them the Franciscans. Almost from the start, Francis's vision was for the world. He tried to go to Syria and to Morocco, but was thwarted. Then in 1219, a crusading expedition to Egypt gave him his opportunity. With 11 companions, he accompanied the army to the Middle East, where he met with the Sultan of Egypt and tried to convert him, but was unsuccessful. From Egypt, he visited the holy places in Palestine, and it was more than a year before he again saw Italy. During his absence, differences arose among the brothers. Some felt that their rapid growth demanded more organization, more rules, more supervision. Others tried to cling to the simple original principle of Christ-like poverty. Upon Francis's return to Italy, he saw that the problems were more than he could handle. He was a model, not a manager. So he appealed to the Pope to appoint Cardinal Ugolino as his advisor, and soon he surrendered the administration of the Brotherhood to his associate, Peter di Cattaneo. Lord Jesus, he prayed, I give thee back this family which thou didst entrust to me. Thou knowest that I have no longer the strength or the ability to take care of it. It is a familiar scene in Christian organizations. The founder establishes, another administers. Ugolino, who later became Pope Gregory IX, admired Francis greatly, but he was above all a prince of the church. He saw the possibilities of the movement as an agent for the advancement of the church, especially where its authority had been administered by Arnold, Waldo, and the Cathari, especially where his authority had been undermined by Arnold, Waldo, and the Cathari. He would reform the church by giving the Franciscans authority. Francis wanted to reform the world, not by power, but by practicing and preaching Christ-like humility. Profiles of Faith. Clare of Assisi, 1194 to 1253, slipped out of her father's house when she was 18 years old and fled to Francis of Assisi's community. She had heard him preaching and wanted to give her life to prayer and poverty. Francis cut off her hair, gave her a rough robe to wear, and sent her to live with a Benediction community. When a dwelling had been constructed next to San Damiano, Clare, joined by her sister Agnes, moved there and began what was known as the Poor Ladies of San Damiano, a female version of the Franciscans. Despite the church's attempts to conform the sisters and the women who joined them to a more common Benediction order, they remained true to the teaching and modeled lifestyle of Francis. Some have called her the female Francis. 2 days before her death, the Pope recognized her order, and 10 years after her death, her order was reaffirmed as the Order of St. Clare. In 1223, Pope Honorius III confirmed a new rule for the order, which allowed for an elaborate organization and made begging a fundamental trait of the order. Thus, Franciscans joined Dominicans and a great mendicant counteroffensive in preaching, doctrine, and dedication. Francis lived to see his ideal changed. He feared the spread of worldly power to his followers, lest the service of the poor be neglected. As his end drew near, he was carried back to Assisi and died there on October 3rd, 1226, in full humility and song. Francis was a product of his age, a lover of lady poverty, but he belongs to all the Christian centuries. For a few years, wrote Herbert Workman, the Sermon on the Mount became a realized fact, but the dream passed from all but a few. For another century, the Franciscans were divided between the conventuals, who allowed the church to hold property for Franciscan use, and the spirituals, who argued that complete poverty was an indispensable note of the true church. This lady poverty remained a challenge to the church of wealth and power, but like Innocent III's vision of universal dominion, it proved an impossibility for the whole church for all times.